Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar for the Green Tourism Incentive Program, or the GTIP, as we often refer to it. My name is Bernie Meyer from the Department of Tourism, and I'm joined here by a number of my colleagues from both the department and the Industrial Development Corporation, including Mr. Craig Soles, who will be the lead presenter in the main part of the webinar. I would like to ask everyone to maybe just turn off any cameras and microphones during this session, so that we don't have any disruptions during the presentation. And also, you're welcome to post any chat in the chat box or questions in the chat box, which we will then get to during the Q&A session afterwards. So please, if you have your camera on, your microphone, please turn that off now, so that we don't have too many interruptions. All right, so let's start briefly. Today's webinar is part of a ongoing effort from the department to promote and provide information on the Green Tourism Incentive. So broadly, what we'll do is we will provide information on the support offered by the program, and also to more specifically talk about the process to apply for the support. So I'd like to start thanking everyone for joining. We have a variety of stakeholders. I see we're up to 162 participants, and these, I believe, would be businesses.
Okay.
Sorry, I hear some noises, and I see comments that people don't have sound. Can I just get an indication from IDC that's running the workshop to see if I'm audible? Craig,
Bernie, you're audible.
You're audible, yeah.
Audible. Okay, excellent. So I think the sound problem might be with the specific people. So hopefully that you can resolve that. But let me continue in thanking everyone for joining. I think we have industry associations on the line. We've got small businesses, we've got provincial and local government stakeholders and other tourism stakeholders. And then I'd also like to thank the marketing and comms teams from both the department and from the IDC, who's helping us to set up this webinar today and to promote the webinar, and for specifically Craig and the team from the partnerships unit in IDC to put this all together for us. You'll see there on the screen, we have a small agenda which covers really the welcoming, which is what I'm doing now, and then I'll also go through a bit of an overview and background on the GTIP, and how to apply will be discussed by Craig Soles. He will speak specifically to the application process for the GTIP, and thereafter, as I said, we'll do a small Q&A session. We've set aside about 2 hours, almost 2 hours for the webinar. Hopefully we end a little bit earlier, but we can try our best to get through everything, and we'll allow sufficient time for questions and answers. All right, so if we can move to the next slide. And as I mentioned, my name is Bernie Meyer from the Department of Tourism. I'm from the Tourism Incentive Program unit within the department. And just by way of background, we essentially offer currently 5 support mechanisms, financial support mechanisms for tourism enterprises in the private sector. This includes the Market Access Support Program, the Tourism Grading Support Program, the Green Tourism Incentive we'll discuss today, and then also the Tourism Transformation Fund and the Tourism Equity Fund. These programs, information on them is available on our website, and the department's website, www.tourism.gov.za, and also on the websites of our implementation partners, which would include the IDC, CIFA, Small Enterprise Finance Agency, the National Empowerment Fund, and the Tourism Grading Council. So all of that information is on the website. I still hear some background noises. I'm not sure whose microphones are on, but if you've joined after I've asked before, If you can maybe just please switch off any microphones and cameras during the presentation, and we'll open that up again. So just check if you have your microphone muted, and if it is not muted, please mute.
Nou as ek besig met 'n meeting maak ek nie fucking cooking clue wat ek nou hier doen nie.
Zandri, please put your camera on.
Want Roan het nou gesê ek moet 'n Teams meeting bywoon, maar ek weet nie hoe doen jy dit.
Sorry, can you ask Zandri, I think it's Zandri from Tonde, can you please switch off your phone or your microphone and your camera? Is there a way that we can mute the participants? There, it's muted, thanks. All right, so apologies for that. Let me continue. Craig, if you can move to the next slide, then I'll start by just providing some background on the Green Tourism Incentive Program. So as I said, the Tourism Incentive Program that the Green Tourism Incentive Program falls under was part of, started in 2015-16. And this was basically an initiative to provide financial support mechanisms to the tourism sector, to private sector enterprises. And specifically in relation to the Green Tourism Incentive Program, we also wanted to contribute to the broader objective of the department around promoting responsible tourism. And then we embarked in, I think it was around 2016, we embarked on a pilot initiative to install solar PV facilities at state-owned tourism attractions. This included Robben Island. We did 4 sites in the Kruger National Park, as well as 3 national botanical gardens across the country. And during this pilot phase, when we did those solar PV installations, in the background, we started to work with IDC to build an incentive program that would encourage small and privately owned tourism enterprises to also adopt more responsible and sustainable tourism practices. The initiative was largely driven by the department's broader mandate, as I said, to promote responsible tourism, but also more specifically at the time, the negative impacts resulting from load shedding and escalating electricity prices, and also then drought conditions in large parts of the country. And these conditions obviously have very negative effects on tourism operations and on the day-to-day running of establishments. So in addition to trying to stimulate...
Excuse me, Bernie, can we just ask B307 to mute, because it interferes the whole time in that venue. At least I've switched the camera off, but it constantly now gives feedback. So now the video is back on. If they can just put the video now off again and to mute, it's coming, the noise is coming from that venue. Please.
Okay. Craig, I think that is you guys at IDC, isn't it? B307. I'm not sure if it's possible to mute. That's the IDC team, if I'm not mistaken. Apologies for that, colleague, for the constant interruptions. But if I can ask again, if everyone can maybe mute the microphones, and if there's a way to mute remotely from the host, that would be great. Then we can... And just
okay, they are muted. Cool.
All right, let's continue. So what I'm trying to get to is why we did this, why we set up the Green Tourism Incentive Program. So it was to help enterprises make a move from normal practices to more efficient and responsible tourism practices. But in addition to this, by providing financial support for this shift, we would also help to ensure enterprises would be able to cope with an uninterrupted visitor experience for their guests, or provide an uninterrupted experience for their guests. It would also reduce their overall input costs and operational costs over the long term, and to facilitate increased competitiveness on both enterprise level, but also on the destination level. So as I said, in collaboration with IDC, we then launched this program, the Green Tourism Incentive Program, or GTIP, in November of 2017. This was about 7 years back, at the same time when we launched the Robben Island solar PV plant. So the department funds the program, and we also help design it, and we are part of the oversight of the program in various committees. But we've appointed the IDC to administer the program on our behalf, which means that all applications for the GTIP goes to IDC, and IDC manages those for us. So if you can go to the next slide, Craig, I'll just quickly talk about very high level on what the program focus on, which type of efficiency solutions are we supporting under the GTIP. And this really relates to energy efficiency and also water efficiency and renewable energy generation. So some examples as highlighted there on the slide. On the energy side include solar and wind generation, efficient lighting, so smaller installations of small items like efficient lighting systems, but then also smaller, also efficiency equipment such as heat pumps and solar water heating systems. And in some cases, we support more efficient appliances such as gas stoves or solar cookers and the like. And then on the water side, it's also small interventions such as aerated taps and low flow shower heads, or in some cases, or dual flush toilets, and in some cases also larger installations such as grey water systems, grey water recycling, and rainwater harvesting systems. What we do not support, and which is explicitly excluded from the program, is the cost of drilling boreholes or desalination plants. And then there are a few very low-cost interventions, such as the resource management policies and awareness programs for staff, which will be also covered under this. If we can move to the next slide, I will just, before Craig takes over, briefly highlight the program approach and what it covers and how the program offers support. So you'll see there the different blocks, and it starts with predetermined application windows. So what we do is we do not keep the program open constantly. We have predetermined and set application windows to manage applications. We normally do about 2 of these a year, and we announce the opening of windows through a ministerial announcement or media reviews, media statements. We also publish this information on our website and share it on social media channels. We share it with industry associations, with provinces to reach as many people as possible. So we're very dependent on our network of stakeholders to on-send and share information. Then we have various awareness sessions that we do with provincial and local government in different parts of the country. And as I said, the most recent, the windows that we open, we've most recently opened I think it's the 10th application window, which opened in September 2024 in conjunction with Tourism Month. And this window will stay open until the 28th of February in 2025. After which we hope we'll close and we'll process, and then we hope to open another window later in 2025. So there are 2 parts of the GTIP application process, and Craig will go into detail on these. But the first part is essentially an energy efficiency or resource efficiency audit. And the audit is important because this sets the baseline and determines what the status is of the applicant, what its baseline usage is and utilization in terms of water consumption, energy consumption, and that assessment or audit also then produces a final report, and that report then forms the basis for the second phase of the application. In that audit report, and once we've established what the current baseline is and the usage patterns of the particular applicant, the report then makes recommendations on what can be done and what can be installed to improve that situation and to improve efficiencies. This audit report, or the first phase of a GTIP application, if you're eligible and meet the basic qualification criteria, the cost of that is 100% covered under the program, so it's no cost to the applicant at all, and we will do that audit report. It takes a few months to get allocated an assessor, or it may take a few weeks or months to take that, depending on where the business is and how available the assessors are. We have a whole team of dedicated assessors appointed under the program. And once your audit report is done, it is then up to you whether you want to proceed to the second phase. And the second phase of the GTIP application process is where you apply for funding support. And what we offer under the funding support, and that is funding to install and implement the recommended solutions of the first phase report. And depending on the scoring under your application, you may qualify for between 50% to 90% of the total cost of that recommended implementation for energy and water efficiency solutions. That grant funding component, the 50 to 90%, is capped at 1 million rand per applicant or per installation. So yeah, that's really the funding benefits offered by the program. Applicants then have to elect which part of that recommended part they want to prioritize and implement, and then they have to identify potential implementers and installers. Once those have been approved, the installer have to be paid the first part, and the first part is the portion of the cost for that installation that is not covered by the grant. So say, for example, you have a project that costs 500,000 rand, 500,000 rand to install, and you qualified for a 50% grant component. That means 250,000 rand would be covered by the program, and 250,000 rand needs to be funded by yourself as the beneficiary or the applicant. The portion not covered by the grant, the 250,000 that you need to pay, needs to be paid to the installer first. And once you've paid that portion and the installer has commenced installation, that's when the IDC would release the grant component of the fund. So we pay that directly to the service provider, and we do not pay it out to the applicant. So that's a way to manage funds. So I think this is basically the overview of the program, and just to explain how it came about and what it offers and how the approach works, what we do. And I think at this point I'll hand over to Craig to take us through the next part of the presentation or the webinar, where he will explain the specific details of each phase and the requirements and the process to help everyone that would like to be an applicant to be able to do that smoothly and efficiently. And thereafter, then we'll do the Q&A session. I hope that was clear, and that this would be valuable information for you. And Craig, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Like Bernie has said, there are two phases to this program. The idea and intention of this session is really to hone in on the first phase, which is phase 1, the eligibility phase, and that is the phase that pertains to window 10 currently. But we are going to run through the entire process for your benefit, so that you know what also then lies beyond the first phase. So as I was saying, the program is open to both existing and new privately owned tourism establishments. And by tourism establishments, we really mean those that offer services directly to tourism clients. So we do exclude suppliers and intermediaries, tour operators, those that don't necessarily own the infrastructure, but put together packages for tourist clients. So these are really the accommodation type establishments, facilities, and attractions that we focus on in the program. We focus on small enterprises, and that speaks to two categories, being the EME, the exempt micro enterprise, as well as in the qualifying small enterprises, and that's according to the tourism triple BEE scorecard. For EME, that is companies up to 5 million, revenue up to 5 million, whereas the QSE is then between 5 and 45 million. So this means that if your turnover is beyond 45 million, you do not qualify for this program. It also means that if you're a new establishment, we then use your first year of full service to determine how then which category you fall in. So if you do budgets, which will be required, and this is detailed in the brochure and the website, for a new establishment, you would be required then to put together budgets, and part of that is a forecast, and we will then determine your first full year of operations. What is your turnover levels, and that will then qualify or quantify which category you fall within. For this eligibility phase, there's really very few requirements, and this is really document collation. The first being, and I'll give you a little more detail on this. So the first thing that we require, or let me rather say part of what we require, is 12 months historical consumption data. And then we also require then, and that's in the form of utility bills or independent proof of that consumption, as well as then the occupancy data for the corresponding 12 months of consumption data that one has provided. The other thing that we would require is your business registration documents, depending on what type of establishment you are or what type of incorporation you are. We would also require that you have a valid SARS tax verification PIN provided, and also, in addition to providing the valid tax verification PIN, you need to ensure that you are actually tax compliant. So we'll do the verification check on our side, but it's always good for you as well to ensure that that is the case, lest you find out down the line that you may have something outstanding. We'd require your latest annual financial statements, and again, that is used, of course, to determine which level of entity you are at, EME or QSE, as well as to see what your main revenue drivers are. Then we require a completed application form, and there's a link over there just directing you to the website where the application form is, but it is on the IDC website. In addition to the completed application form, and as part of the application form, there is a tab called the inventory list, and that is also required to be completed. And I will go through all of these, a little more in detail so that we understand what exactly is required. All right. So as I've said, it's open for existing as well as newly privately owned tourism establishments, and I've already given an indication of what type of establishments these are. I've also highlighted that your new establishments or those under construction can apply for the funding, because we also understand that when you're under construction, we wouldn't want you to first include the traditional or conventional energy and water methods or resource methods, and then have to remove them and replace them with energy efficiency. However, you are required to be at advanced stages of the development with very minimal delay or completion risk attached to the project. Okay, this is just highlighting again what we mean when we speak about the categories of funding, and this does become important when it gets to the second phase, determining how then you qualify for the grant funding. So just highlighting again that you have your exempt micro enterprise and your qualifying small enterprise, and these are categorized by virtue of their revenue. Turnover for EME is up to 5 million, whereas for QSE it's between 5 and 45 million. Anything beyond that does not fall within the program. Right, so I'm going to jump right into the first section where we speak about the 12-month historical consumption data that you would require, and I've listed here, or I've added here a template of a utility bill, and that is what we require for your application. So we do receive utility bills on a monthly basis. You're required to provide 12 of these consecutive monthly bills that actually reflects your consumption data. So if you look on the bottom of the right here, you'll see there's something called energy charge for estimated consumption. Right, I'm just going to jump to the next slide to where that is just blown up a bit so we can see it a little better. That is what your energy consumption or your bill would reflect on a monthly basis. Energy charge for estimated consumption, you have 615 units, kilowatt hours, and at a rate of 2.5811 per kilowatt hour, which then translates into your monthly amount for that month of 1,587.38. And you will note where this is important as I go through the application. What is not specified on this tab is that you would also require to match this data, your occupancy for this particular month. So you see they provide 12 months historical consumption data and occupancy data for the same month. And I'll show you where that is important in the application form. However, we do require this source data. All right, so everyone will be expected to give us 12 months utility bills or source of verification of the information for their consumption. Right. Then we also understand that not everybody is getting their consumption data on the utility bills because some of us are on prepaid. Now, most times you can actually get your transaction history from the company that you purchase your prepaid from, or the meter that you use. So this is something that you can request from that company. And this is the format, one of the formats that one would find, that you have your transactions listed on this transaction history. It also then reflects the amount that has been purchased. It reflects the tariff charges, and it reflects then your units for that particular amount that you've purchased. All right. And then we also know that sometimes it is difficult to get that printout. We would then require at least that you have the proof of purchases for these prepaid electricity or prepaid units that reflect again the units purchased, in this case 292.60 for an amount of 1,000 Rand sitting on the top. Right, so this is a source document for the information that we require. We then require your business registration documents, and this is an example of a CIPC document that could be required, or that would be required, and this is something that we would also require for you to then furnish us with. Now, we understand that these are generally available for PTYs and CCs. However, we also fund sole proprietors and other forms of ownership, such as partnerships and trusts. So we understand that as sole proprietors and partnerships, you may not have these registration documents, and we'll then base it on your ID documents. So you then have to provide us with copies of your IDs if you're a partnership, or a copy of your ID if you're a sole proprietor. When it comes to trusts, you would then have to provide us with your trust deed as the source document for business registration. Right, a valid tax SARS compliance PIN. This is what it looks like. And I've highlighted over here, or just to highlight that this issue date and the PIN expiry date is quite important. So we do require that you give us a valid SARS compliance certificate, which means this PIN expiry date should not have passed. All right. And of course, as you apply, it would make sense, or it would be of interest to make sure that you have enough time left for us to actually do the assessment. If this expiry date comes within the next week or month, we may then find ourselves in a position where once we've actually gone through the information, we find ourselves that the PIN has expired, and we then have to request for further compliance documents. That's not ideal. So we would like to request that you obviously make sure that this is valid for a reasonable period so we can do our checks and balances. This certificate is usually valid for 12 months from the date of issue. And this, if you have access to your own tax e-filing, you are able to draw this from the e-filing system yourself, but you can also ask then, call into the SARS offices for them to provide you with this. You can ask your accountant, if you have one, to also assist you with this. All right, so it is reasonably easily available. And like I said, I think I would go one step further, which is also available on the e-filing system, is actually to check your compliance. Because sometimes we think we're compliant, but we may have missed one payment of VAT or whatever the case may be, and we only find out when the IDC checks the system and finds that you are non-compliant, and therefore then causes a delay in the application. So, I mean, it's just a good practice to check it and ensure that it is the case before you send that through. Okay. And then we require annual financial statements. Please don't get too bogged down on the detail within these illustrations. However, it's just to highlight what the financial statements should look like. We do require a balance sheet. We do require an income statement. This is obviously just for illustrative purposes, so it might be a lot more detailed than what you would have available. But what we do with these is actually to check whether your revenue is within the category that we fund, EME or QSE, as well as what's your main revenue driver, to ensure that you actually fall within the category of a tourism establishment. So we find that sometimes we have one or more than one revenue stream, and depending on how prevalent the other revenue streams are, one needs to determine then how we deal with the application. So if accommodation is a minute part of your business, one has to then consider whether it is a tourism establishment that we're funding or something else. And that's really what we use these financial statements for. It does not have to be audited. If the Companies Act does not require you to audit. It does not have to be reviewed if the Companies Act does not require you to review it. And that's all based on what they call public interest scores. And I think those who are providing financial statements or the accountants will be able to assist further in that regard. Right. And then this is the application form that we require you to complete. We do specify, and this is straight from the website. You'll note that we've also got a hyperlink to the website over there. But literally what this means is that this is a snapshot of the application form that's sitting there. So nothing should be different when you go in and you download this application form. All right. So we do say that this section must be completed by first-time applicants. In fact, it must be completed by all applicants, even if you're coming for a second round or anything. Assessment has not been conducted by GTIP assessors, so that's irrelevant. It has to be completed by all applicants. We ask that you don't alter the structure of this application form, because we do try and keep it uniform so that we can also manipulate the data easier. We do require that you submit all the supporting documents as requested upfront, as I've just outlined for you. Those have to support the application form as it comes through. Yeah, and then it highlights the application email address as well, which is gtipapplications@idc.co.za. There may be others who have had engagement with the program before that know that there's another email address, gtip@idc. That's not the application's address. And if you do send an application there, you run the risk that it may not be picked up by the application or the window. So it's critical that we send all applications only to this email address as specified. Right, then the information required very simply is the company name, and sometimes we have a company, Craig Saul's Pty Ltd, but my trading name is something else, CRS Bed and Breakfast. So we require that you kindly then just specify that for us here as well. What type of company are you? What type of incorporation are we dealing with? And that then helps us to see what are we looking for in terms of the business registration document that we have requested. If you are incorporated, we require your company registration number. When were you established? VAT registration number, BEE level. So that would be anything from 1 to non-compliant, but nobody is excluded from this at this stage. And then just to highlight the business activity, is it accommodation? Are you a facility, an attraction, water park, whatever the case may be? Highlight what your main activity is. If you're other, then please specify what that is. For accommodation, we require the number of rooms. Is the establishment graded for those establishments that require grading, and what level of grading do you have? Details of the activities that you have. So we would have sometimes accommodation that does have conferencing facilities as well. And that's the type of thing that we ask you to please detail for us in here as well. We require then that you just detail revenue for the past 2 financial years. We are currently in 2024. Most establishments have a year end of 28 Feb 2024. So we require at least previous year's revenue and net profit, as well as then your current financial year revenue and net profit. We also require contact details so we know who to deal with and how. And this is all information that would require obviously for the application as well as our database. What is very critical is number 4 over here, where it speaks to occupancy data. Now, I went through the 3 forms, at least 3 examples of consumption data. I highlighted the electricity data on there, and I highlighted that you have your total electricity consumption as a number. It was 615 kilowatts, and it had a total electricity cost of 1,587. That needs to be reflected for every single month on this consumption table. So for the month of September, we would have to then take the utility bill, get the information and input it into this table for electricity. And if you are considering water interventions, we require that you also put that data for water as well. So it would be consumption data, the cost, and then very importantly, because there's no other document that gives us this information, you would have to give us the occupancy percentages to correspond with those months for every single month in this 12-month period. This document is this particular cell called date. You can change those numbers in there. So the fact that we have September 23 over there for 12 months running up until October 2024 is of no consequence. If you've got your latest data from December 2023 to November 2024, that you can go input the dates over here as well as then input all the other data across this table. But important occupancy data. So if your occupancy was 50% for the month of September, you'll put there 50%, 30% October, 90% November, 100% December, 50% Jan, etc., etc. And that would have to correspond with the month of the utility bill. One expects, and this is type of the analysis that would possibly be done by the assessors, one expects that there's some correlation between that occupancy and the consumption, because the more occupancy, the higher potential consumption. So one expects to look at that correlation as well. But that is something for the assessors to contribute. But this assists them in doing that, establishing the baseline and establishing the analysis going forward. Right, so that's the application form. There is 2 other parts to this, where it just gives us an indication of some data, shareholding, employment, etc. And this is very simple just for you to complete this for us, if we have this data on hand. We also have on the right of this slide a checklist where we literally ask you and it's just a sanity check for yourself as well. Highlight that I've actually put in my business registration document, select, drop down, yes, I have. Valid SARS compliance PIN, drop down, yes, I have. Latest audited, reviewed, or compiled financial statements, yes, I have. 12-month historical consumption and utility and occupancy data, yes, I have. Inventory checklist, yes, I have. And of course, we haven't dealt with what we call inventory checklist yet, but I'll show you that within a minute. Please note that any application received without any of these supporting documents will not be considered and will be considered incomplete, and we will not continue with that application. We also require that you just declare that you've given everything to us, everything's above board, and also that everything is in line with the municipal bylaws. There's no what do they call them, bridging of meters, etc., etc. All right. There's a disclaimer at the bottom, but I'm going to highlight that a little later in this presentation as well. So I'm not going to concern myself too much with that at this stage. Okay. And then remember I said there's an inventory list that I had referred to. This is a tab on that same application form. Once you download it, you have your application form as one tab and you have your inventory list as the other tab. This inventory list is once again just an assistance to the assessor in terms of what we are dealing with at the establishments. And it then assists again with baseline as well as the assessment in terms of structuring the right solutions for the establishment. This is not a desktop study, so don't be too concerned about that. We will then also, the assessors will come through to your establishment and do an on-site assessment, but this helps them to map and plan for that visit as well. So what we require in this inventory list is really just a detailed list of what interventions or equipment that you have running at your establishment that has a bearing on consumption or on resource, energy, water, gas, whatever it may be, on the resource consumption. So it says include only appliances and equipment that consume resources. So we don't want to hear about the bed unless it's an electric bed that bounces or something. But we really want those interventions that consume electricity, those interventions that consume water, etc. Right. So for an example, you may have, let's say this is a 5-room guest house, where you have one building, you've got a kitchen, you have a lounge, and then you have your 5 guest rooms. You would then have here as a room, you'd have kitchen, as a room, you'd have lounge, and this again you can also manipulate. So this is not fixed. You can go into these cells, you can delete this, and you can put in your own descriptions there. So room number 1 is kitchen. Then you'll tell us what appliances you have in the kitchen. Sometimes it's quite easy to see what models there are, what kilowatts, etc. they have, and that's the type of data that one looks for over here. And then we go to our next room. It might be, and there's a couple, you can put in anything you want to here. There's enough space to put in as much data as you can. But let's say you have 5 pieces of equipment in your kitchen. It's your washing machine, it's your kettles, it's your urn, etc., etc. Those are the type of things you'll list over here, and you'll give us indication of the numbers, the model number, if you can, the ratings on these, so we have an indication of what we're dealing with in the kitchen. Then you also may have, let's say 5 guest rooms. Guest room 1 will have X 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Guest room 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., etc. In the larger establishments, you may find that you have, let's say, 2 categories of rooms. Let's say you have your standard room and you have your executive room. One doesn't expect that if you have 20 standard rooms that you're going to list standard room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right up to number 20. You may then say that they are all
Apologies,
standard
Craig.
rooms.
Sorry,
Have,
Craig.
yes.
We maybe there's someone that's muted, Vida Mahlangu. If she can maybe just mute, then thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption.
No, absolutely fine. Thank you, Bernie. So as I was saying, if you do have standard rooms and you have maybe 2 or 3 categories of standard rooms, one doesn't expect that you're going to say standard room 1, standard room 2, standard room 3, but you may be able to say standard rooms. How many of them do you have? Standard room has got a TV. How many units? 10 units. Standard room has got a hair dryer. How many of them you have? 10, model, blah, etc. So, you can categorize them, but at least give us the indication that there's so many of these, and these are the type of things that we're dealing with. Big user, of course, air cons. So one would have to list those as well. And if you know the model, etc., that would help as well in this regard. So that's the inventory list that we require, and it is attached to the application form as a tab. That, in a nutshell, is phase 1 complete, and that is mainly the subject of this webinar for the Windows 10 applications. Then we have what we call the next phase. So assuming that you've gone through phase 1, successfully completed phase 1, which means that we would have done your eligibility assessment. We would have allocated your application to an assessor. The assessor would have gone out and done the resource efficiency audit. You would have had an agreement on what he has found and what he sees as ways or means of improving your resource efficiency. We would then finalize that report, and you would then have the opportunity to apply for the funding phase, which is phase 2. Now, there's no window for this phase. So basically, window 10, as you conclude your first phase, you automatically fall into this category should you meet the criteria and you want to continue. So we do understand some people may want the report for their own benefit and not necessarily want to go through the process for whatever reason. That's entirely up to them. However, generally, those who have gone through the process want actually then for us to assist them in funding these interventions. So phase 2 becomes a little more complex. It's got a little more meat on the bone, because we are now proceeding to a funding phase where we are potentially going to extend funding of up to 1 million, depending on how you qualify, to your establishment for the installation of these interventions. The one important thing that we want to establish is economic viability, because we do not want to implement interventions into a company that will not be there in the foreseeable future. So there will be now those financials that you've provided. We will require that you give us now updated financials if we don't have more recent management accounts, so that we can do this economic viability test to see whether we can actually proceed with the funding phase or not. At this point, for those establishments that require star grading, you would have to be star graded. So that was not a requirement initially for phase 1. However, should you proceed to phase 2, that will be a requirement that you have to adhere to. So you cannot be an accommodation establishment, a B&B, and not be star graded and expect to go through to the funding phase. That won't happen. So you'd be expected to then get star graded. All right. Now, of course, the audit report forms the basis of this application as well. And that, of course, is the audit report that we would have then assisted you with in drafting. Our assessors would have assisted you in drafting, and that final assessment report would be used as the basis of this funding. Now, it may well be that you have been proactive in this process and you've provided an audit report yourself that you have had done for some or other reason. Obviously, we've got minimum criteria for audit reports established. However, there is an opportunity, if yours does meet some of these requirements, that our assessor does not then draft an entirely new from scratch report, but he can review your audit report and ensure then that that is in line with what we require. And that would be done as part of phase 1 as well. Then, of course, at this stage, we would have to then establish whether you have your own contribution for the funding that is applied for, or whether you'd be able to raise it then from your financier, bank, or whatever the case may be. All right, and part of this phase 2, so remember, we've actually gone through, quite a bit of detail, the requirements for phase 1, because that is the subject of this. However, for phase 2, there are obviously additional requirements, and those are listed over here. So we would have a consent form that you need to sign. This gives us then the right to then do certain checks and balances on our side to proceed with the funding phase. Right. Like I mentioned, we need latest financial information. So yes, we've required that you give us your latest financials, which maybe would have been up to Feb 2024. However, if we go to the funding phase, we'd have to get updated financial statement or management accounts, which may be then for September, depending on when you actually, we get to this phase. So we would not be able to rely on data that is significantly old. Generally, the benchmark is no older than 3 months for these financials or management accounts that we require. The resource efficiency audit report is a requirement, but again, that's what we've provided you with. You then have to go through the FICA requirement. Again, sometimes quite an onerous process, but really documentation that you have to provide for us to proceed with the application. We will provide you with the list of information required once you've concluded phase 1. At this stage, you'd obviously also have to, as part of the audit report, we would require that you provide quotations for the interventions that are identified, because this gives us a benchmark in terms of what we are dealing with. However, at this stage, you may not have identified the service provider that you want to use, but for the funding phase, we require that you actually do so. Not critical for the submission, but it does help with establishing that this service provider is actually screened. The service provider is actually in line with the costing that we're taking to the investment committees for approval. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a position where we do take applications for funding through for approval, and when we get to the nominated service provider, they advise that we actually can't do this for this price or this cost, and it becomes quite a to and fro, and it just sets the process back as well. So that is something that we need to then look at quite carefully. Again, I've mentioned star grading is a requirement where applicable. You would at this stage also then have to provide a BE certificate or a sworn affidavit. And also we require a copy of proof either a copy of a valid lease agreement if you don't own the property yourself, or then proof of ownership if the property is owned by the applicant. Now, this is important because the applicant in this case may be CRS Pty Ltd. Now, and that is maybe Craig Sauls Pty Ltd. That is the applicant to the fund, and we expect then that the property where the establishment is running on, or where the interventions will be attached to, either have a proof of ownership to Craig Sauls Pty Ltd, or if Craig Sauls Pty Ltd is owned by me as an individual, the property is on my name as an individual, there has to be a lease agreement between the two parties to establish that relationship, and that needs to be provided as part of this process as well. Okay. All right, and then again, this is later down the line in terms of us doing the finance application. At this point, we obviously have to do a scoring model. So remember, the grant is it is a proportionate grant between 50 and 90%. So how do we determine who gets 50 and who gets 90? It's these type of measures that we take into account as a scoring model. So we've got a scoring model that we input all the data. Part of the data is the impact of the resources or the energy efficiency solutions that we are recommending. So let's, for instance, say that we're going to have replace your inefficient air cons that you're currently running with more efficient air cons, and that's going to render your consumption lower by 10%. So if you were using 200 kilowatt hours per month, you'll now be using 180 kilowatt hours per month. There's a 10% saving on the changing of the air cons. That would be taken into account in the scoring model. The level of savings by all the interventions would be taken into account. We then also take into account your BEE level, and therefore then we ask for that affidavit or BEE score. BEE certificate. So the better your BEE score, the higher your savings. Let me just highlight that. The higher your savings, the higher your potential grant. The better your BEE level, the higher your potential grant. Then the size of the enterprise is also taken into account. So the smaller enterprises will then benefit more. So if you're an EME, you get a certain score, and if you're a QSE, you get a certain score, and that also then determines what level of grant you will qualify for. All right. We also expect that you will commit to this minimum energy and water savings. So basically, we're saying that you need to buy into the interventions as well, because there will be at some point a energy savings audit that we do to determine whether the interventions that we implemented, the intention was actually reached by these interventions. So it is incumbent that we commit to actually trying to get to that as much as we can. We do allow for the less complex intervention. So you may be able to go buy aerated tap fittings. It's something you just turn off the cap of your tap and you then just put it back on. Those are the type of things you may be able to do yourself. You don't necessarily need a qualified installer for those. We may reimburse you for those non-complex interventions. However, we require that we actually agree upon them. So we can't come afterwards and say, I've done all of these things, please reimburse me. It's a very interactive process. There is someone that kind of deals with the implementation phase of these when you get to that, and it's really just a courtesy to engage so that we understand who's doing what and how, and anticipate these. And we can also advise, yes, this is recommended or this is not, and we will reimburse for this, but maybe not for that. All right, because I sometimes fancy myself to be a plumber as well, but we know that we don't do the job the same way that a qualified plumber should. So those are the type of things we have to guide and say, this is not something that we would recommend you do yourself, or we would reimburse for, because we require certain warranties to cover or to follow those in installations. All right. We expect, and I think it has been said already, that your own contribution has to be implemented first or has to be injected first, which means if you've got a 90% grant, you will have to fork out your 10% first before we then fork out the other 10% or the other 90%. You will pay that 10% directly to the service provider, and we will pay our funding directly to the service provider as well. We say that we only use service providers who meet the program's requirements. So there is a list of requirements that the service providers need to adhere to. Things like, experience, things like certifications, are they accredited? And all these things are really just to protect you as the applicant and the establishment when you do use these service providers, where warranties need to be valid, etc. So we have a set of requirements that the service providers need to adhere to. However, the relationship between the service provider and the applicant is between the service provider and the applicant. So it's not the IDC or the GTIP responsibility to source service providers for you. That's something that is your responsibility. We will just obviously provide you with the requirements so that you ensure that they meet those. And it's really just to protect yourself and ourselves as investing in this program as well. But the relationship is entirely yours, and you need to then manage that process. All right. Right, and then here's just some of the requirements or criteria that the installers need to adhere to. Be a registered entity, be tax compliant, have a minimum level 4B broad-based Black economic empowerment compliance, be suitably qualified. And how do we check that? Minimum 2 years experience and written satisfactory references, 3 written satisfactory references for the particular work that they are actually going to try and do at our establishment. They also have the responsibility to use certified equipment and components, and to the extent that there is a list of approved equipment that they would have to use as well when they do provide the services. They need to offer the adequate guarantees, warranties, and work certifications so that we know that we are dealing with people that know what they're doing, and if something does go wrong, that they can actually come back and sort it out for us. Accreditation by relevant bodies. So obviously a plumber and electrician may have different bodies that they need to apply to, and therefore we say the relevant bodies that need to be adhered to. And then, of course, we need to conduct the work in accordance with these resource efficiency recommendations. So there's been an extensive process up front where we engage where the assessor and yourselves would engage, and we get to a point where drafting a report that is signed off by all parties. So extensive work goes into what is actually interventions that are required. So we require that whoever comes on board and does things needs to adhere to those prescripts of those reports in implementing these interventions. This is very important, members, purely because this is not an exercise where, let's get through this process, get a report done, and, come down the line, we're not interested in this, or we don't like this, we want to do that. It doesn't work like that. It's actually almost taking you back to square one if we do that. So it's incumbent that the assessor, yourself, and by then hopefully your installer are in agreement with what is required and what is recommended, so that we don't have any of these comebacks later in the process that just takes us back to step one. It frustrates ourselves as well as yourself. The process is laborious as it is, so we don't want these type of hiccups also coming through in the process. So we really urge you to take the time to understand the report, agree with the report, based on that understanding, and not because what so-and-so said. You need to be satisfied, because at the end of the day, it is your funding, number one, that's going to go into this. We've granted you funding to be able to do this. So it's really incumbent that you ensure that that money is well spent as well, and understand the recommendations as well. This is just a, excuse me, This is a diagram just showing the flow of the application process, but everything that is sitting on here is what we've discussed already. So it's really the audit application eligibility phase. We do resource efficiency audit, the funding application phase. Final assessment is us preparing for the submission to our adjudication panel. We then, once approved, we move to implementation, and after implementation, it's the monitoring and savings thereof. So that's really just diagrammatic representation of the program itself. All right, so in a nutshell, this is really what it is. You find your the application form on the website, on this hyperlink, takes you right through to the application form. There's a brochure on the website as well, so that you can, all the information that we've shared with you now is on the website as well as in that brochure. So you can always go back and check the information and ensure that you are actually on the right track. Once you've done so, you need to send all this information to GTIP applications@idc.co.za, and it needs to be accompanied, of course, by your source documents. Annexure A referred to here is that inventory list. We just haven't updated Annexure A over here, but that's really your inventory list. That is a tab on the application form that is required as well. Right. Okay, and then I think, yeah, really, I think it's just emphasizing, kindly send it to this application address. Don't send it to GTIP at IDC. It's preferable that you don't send it to someone that you know within the department or to IDC and rely on them to send it through to GTIP applications, because there can also be issues there. Sometimes it's missed, sometimes it's not sent through, rather just send it through here. This is manned by someone that will be going through the applications and ensuring that yours is not missed. This is just to highlight that this is a specific program that is owned by the Department of Tourism. That is the stakeholder involved here. We as IDC manage this particular program on their behalf. So it's not got anything to do with IDC's normal tourism funding instruments. All right. So this GTIP is a specific fund. It has different application process to IDC. It has a different criteria to IDC. So it is a fund on its own. So if you go to the IDC website, for instance, and you click a application process, which is not the one that's been detailed here, we will not know about it. We may find out about it at some stage, but it may be well too late when the window is closed. So we do urge you to kindly stick to this application address and process. All right. And then remember, on the application form, I said there's something that I'm not going to discuss because it will be highlighted a little later in this application. It is this last block sitting over here. No agents have been appointed by IDC or the Department of Tourism to assist enterprises with applications. The use of and payment of any fees to agents is at the applicant's discretion. Right. So if there's an email that goes around that says, I am representing the Department of Tourism, I'm representing the IDC, I'm a preferred supplier for this person, and that's why I can do this for you, none of that is applicable. Right. It is your prerogative if you want to use agents, consultants, or any other person that wants to or needs to assist you with this application. That is your prerogative. We don't endorse them, and the process will follow exactly the same process as a direct application would have followed. All right. Also, if you do prefer to do it that way, for whatever reason, we will require a specific letter of consent from yourself that you have appointed this person to do so. We don't want to know how much it's going to cost. You cannot come back to us and say, it's cost me so much, my application's been unsuccessful, what do I do now? We don't endorse them. We've got no agents. This is a direct application that you can do yourself. I've gone through the application process to show you how simple it is, and it's really incumbent on you to follow that or proceed as you see fit. All right. If I may, that I think is the end of my application. If I can just get 1 second. I just need to get Our Lady and see if we can actually flight flight a video for you, but I think we may not be able to, considering we've moved from our main screen to the computer. But if you can give me 1 second before we proceed, just give me a minute and we can see if we can actually do that for you quickly.
Thanks, Craig. While Craig is trying to sort that out, let me just quickly come in and say thank you for that presentation. I think it was a lot of information and it was very detailed. I think it may have gone very fast as well. We will go into the Q&A session to answer some of these questions. I see there's plenty of requests for presentations to be shared. I know that the recordings would be posted on the websites of both the department and IDC, so people can listen to them again. But I think we can move to the video and then take some questions and answers. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. Let's proceed. Ready? And that is an example of what can be achieved with the program. Right. I think we're going to jump straight into Q&A. We've already captured a few of the questions that had been posed on the chat. So I'm just going to run through them before we get to any additional or hands. The first question is, we already started with the installation of solar panels and lithium batteries. Do we still qualify for this program? The simple answer is yes, you do qualify for the program, but not for the interventions that you've already implemented. So it's not a reimbursive program in that sense, where you've now put, even if it is very newly installed, we cannot then reimburse you for what you've already done. However, we can still then have an assessor come through and look at whether there's any additional interventions that can be established. So if you have a solar system, and many of us can't implement the entire system all at once, and we've already gone through a particular process of starting, but we could do with an additional battery or additional inverter, etc., then certainly you still qualify for the program, but we won't reimburse you for what you've done already. Where can we get the GTIP application form? I think I've highlighted already. It's on the IDC website, and the links to the in the presentation will take you directly to that as well. At Woodcliff Country House, we have completed the initial steps, but I'd like to follow up on the application. Please advise me the contact email. So GTIP applications at idc.co.za. If you've applied for window 10, that is the same email address that you would follow up. I can confirm that we have received applications. Again, we must emphasize that on the website, you will see that it specifies that your application needs to be complete in all respects. Now, I've taken the opportunity to go through all that you require. No correspondence will be entered into if you have not given us everything we require. So ensure that the applications that come through are complete, and certainly when we get through to them, we will then advise of the success of those applications. I do know that at least for the past 2 weeks, I've not checked the applications, but certainly something that will be done very shortly. It was really a matter of waiting for this webinar, so that those who have applied, if you have missed something, you have an opportunity to actually remedy it by giving us exactly what we require, so that you are not found not qualifying. What if you use a bowl? How will we get the water usage data? So agreed, if you use a bowl and you don't have a metered bowl, there already is one intervention that you can apply for, is a meter. So yes, just advise that this is the case and you don't have the consumption data. We can then still look at how we can assist. Remember, we don't assist with sinking bowls, but there may be interventions around that we may assist with. But certainly, yes, if you don't have that data because of a bowl, it is understandable, and we need to then take that into consideration. Right, does the state-owned company qualify to apply for this funding? No, it does not. It is for privately owned establishments only. What about if we don't have utility bills because of prepaid? I have gone through that, and I've shown at least 2 additional methods of proving your prepaid. I think it's very important that as people that run these establishments, we have to try and keep record of what we're doing. Any business has to collect their costs, so there must be a way of you collecting that information, be it receipt slips, bank statements that have proves that you've purchased this, but it has to have something that actually shows us the source data of the usage. Will you require a startup to project the occupancy rate and energy consumption? Absolutely, that would help. Remember, as a startup, we will ask you for budgets. That budgets need to then detail costs as well. Part of the costs of running a business is the energy costs. And part of your revenue will obviously be then how do you budget revenue? Your revenue will be budgeted based on the utilization of your establishment. That must be based on the occupancy levels, and yes, we will require that, so we have a basis of the numbers. What if you are off-grid? If you are off-grid, if there are any other interventions that we can assist with, then certainly there is still worth or it's still useful for you to consider the program. But of course, knowing what you know now, you need to consider whether it is worthwhile for us to actually proceed with that process. Will you require a startup to project? Okay, that's just a duplication. Yes, we will. Please share presentation. The presentation will be shared, or link will be placed on the website where you will have access to this particular webinar. With the Department of Tourism as well as the IDC. If a property has already applied in the previous window, but has had no feedback, can they reapply? Also, is there a process to follow up on said applications? Okay, so firstly, if you've applied in the previous window and you've had absolutely zero correspondence, that can only happen if you have been found to not comply with the program. But I'm also happy then that in that case, you drop me an email and I can always look into that to see whether, we have a record of that. But yes, absolutely. I would encourage you to reapply and just ensure that all the information that is required is actually then provided. What is the timeline? When application is filed, how long for the audit? How long until, oops. How long for the audit? How long until funding is granted? We've got renovations in June. Will this be on time if we apply tomorrow? So the idea is really that, and with this process is for us to actually try and expedite the applications, streamline the process, not have a to and fro between ourselves and clients or applicants. And therefore, we've taken the time to go through the process step by step. The idea is that we assess application as and when they hit our inbox, so that we can then allocate them as quickly as possible to the assessor, for the assessor to prioritize them and get through the audit assessment so that we can get to the funding phase as quickly as possible. So how long is the process? How long is a piece of string? What we are committing to is that, those who are providing the right information, we want to try and expedite those applications. I can already tell you that from the Window 10 application that Window 10 that has opened on the 2nd of September, we've already had applications that have been found eligible. We've already sent them through to assessors, and we've already gotten the reports back from the assessors. And today we're sitting on the 13th of November. So what I'm trying to highlight is this can be done very quickly if all the pillars are in place. Right, but it's very difficult to tell you that it's going to take two days or 2 months. Contact details required. So the only contact details you require for this application process is the GTIP applications at idc.co.za. I will avail my email address as well, but really that's in the case of, really you're not winning with something on the applications address. I've got myriads of emails coming through, so we want to restrict that to only critical ones that need assistance. White Shark Guest House has sent through our resource efficiency report as an audit was done on site, and the report sent on the 10th of October having passed phase 1. How do we follow up? Shark Guest House, you can then send me a particular email. I'll give my email address, and I will then assist you in how we can deal with that. Right. What amount of this funding are allocated for grants and what amount are granted for loans, if any? So this is a 100% grant fund. And when I say 100%, all the funding is available for grants. However, it's not 100% grant. It is proportionate, so you would have to bring something to the table. Excuse me. Please explain the funding criteria for entities less than 5 million. Exactly the same as the funding criteria for an entity above 5 billion. It follows exactly the same process. We have only been operational for 3 months. Do we qualify? Yes, you do qualify. In this case, you will give us the records for 3 months, and you'll also have to project, of course, your occupancy as well as in consumption. We can use this as a base to assist in the application. When does the current application window close? You broke up at the start. So the application window closes on the 28th of February 2025. I want to urge you to not wait until the 27th of Feb 2025 to apply, because if that's the case, it does become then a mass application on the last day, and you might find that your application is hanging in the system, only comes through on the 1st of March, and then someone says to you, you missed the deadline. So let's not wait for that last day of the application window. Let's try and get it in as quickly as possible. We'll definitely try to assess them as quickly as possible as well. Okay, when does we have been allocated X amount but only use a portion of the amount. Do we apply for the how do we apply for the outstanding? Please assist with our way forward. We have been allocated X amount. So if I can, I'm going to try and understand this question. It may well be that you've applied for the GTIP grant. You've been approved for, let's say, 500,000, and you've only used 300,000. I'm not sure if that's the case. Obviously, the interventions that you haven't implemented, that money can be used towards those. If you are asking that there's a 1 million maximum amount, and I've applied in the past and I've only gotten 500,000 for whatever reason, and you think there are other interventions that you can implement that potentially could take you up to 1 million, yes, you can apply in an open window. So it would be exactly the same process. You would possibly be an existing client, but there is no other way of applying. You'd have to come through exactly the same process. The lifetime cap, of course, is 1 million. So it is a matter of you having to, if you have interventions that we can assist with, justifiable by the assessor's report that has to be done, then certainly you can tap into that funding. Will there be additional windows in future? I can't answer that with certainty, but this is the 10th window, and the program is still in full effect. So that is something that is determined once we get to the assessing of the windows and processing all the information. Sorry, we're just getting through the other questions as we go along. Casa Grande Guest Lodge has the private residence units which use prepaid electricity, and the guest lodge uses utility bill. With this grant cover every part? So no, we will not look at the private residence part of it. It will be restricted to your guest lodge specifically. Will you assess all the applications and give back feedback to the applicants? So if your application is complete in all respects, then you will get feedback that you are successful. The idea is that if your application is not complete, that we're not going to enter into correspondence. So no, we're not going to talk to you all the time. And really, we've seen historically what a mess up this can be. When something's not been supplied, we request it, applicant sends something through, it's still not applicable or it's still not satisfactory. We to and fro, someone misses the ball somewhere and somebody gets into trouble. If your application is complete, you will hear that your application is complete. If you have not done so, kindly ensure that you complete the application adequately. You have that opportunity until the 28th of Feb 2024. I've given examples of what is required. I've given a detailed explanation of completing the application form. There's absolutely no reason someone should submit something that isn't applicable or the wrong thing and expect to actually be considered. Can new projects apply as we'll be expanding from a restaurant into accommodation next year? Okay, so again, we say if you're expanding from a restaurant to accommodation next year, yes, new establishments are eligible, but they have to be in final or advanced stages of completion. So if you are constructing accommodation premises, this needs to be at advanced stages with minimal completion or completion delays. That will certainly then be considered as well. Okay, I think that's all we've gotten from the chat. I'm going to try and go through the hands that I see listed over here quickly and see if we can't get through those. I can only see 4 here, so I'm not sure how many there are actually, but I'll start with the first one. That is the guest house TI. Colleagues, if I may, and I don't want to preempt any questions, but if it is an application that you have applied or have applied in the window to GTIP applications, I will make my, Kasim, you can please put my email address there. Rather send me an email directly so I can engage you there instead of asking the question on this platform in terms of what's happening with my application. Let's keep it generic so that it's something that everyone can benefit from. Thank you. I'm going to try and unmute. Doesn't look like I can. Okay, I think maybe let's just go to. There's the guest house.
Craig.
Excuse me?
Yeah, you've got 6 hands. The guest house 8 something is first.
Okay, let's go. The guest house 8.
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you.
Yes, no, you've already answered my question. It's the one where I was asking, we've only been operational for 3 months.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Then we
Okay,
can
thanks.
lower your. Okay, is it Ike unverified?
Has come out in defense of local shop, and they are instead accusing the mother.
Okay, so orator, is this a okay? Orator, are you asking a question, or is this some program? Okay, I'm just gonna mute that participant for now. Ike, are you there? Okay, let's move on to Gugu Tong.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. We're based in the Northwest, and we have an off-grid campsite on tribal land. This is on a lease basis. So number one, I need to check if we can apply. And secondly, I think partly it has been answered regarding the water supply, because we are actually refilling our tankers currently. Can we submit receipts thereof in terms of us having to present the usage or the consumption thereof? Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Gugu. So to both your questions, the answer is yes, you can apply. Based on what you've explained, you can also provide your receipts as proof of purchase. Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. The next one is Zola Q.
Thank you so much to the previous speaker as well. First of all, Craig, I must say that I really want to give you guys kudos in terms of the speed of your team in terms of responding to clients. We are one of the service providers that do assist clients in terms of the application all the way to installation. I'm from UMTI Energy, and we do this for free, by the way. So I just wanted to commend you and your team in terms of the improvement, because previously it used to take very long for clients to actually get any type of feedback from your team, but that has since improved. So thank you so much for that. So just one question though, we've got a client that applied for 2 properties. So the assessment was done by your team, but now the client has found out that it's way too expensive for them to move forward with 2 properties. However, they would like to move with 1 property. Now, we just want to find out if that will be allowed or if that is something that you guys can look into.
Thank you, Zola, and thank you for that that feedback on the timeframes as well. But absolutely, yes, that's something that we can look into. Obviously, it's an individual circumstance that we have to assess. So happy to take that offline as well.
Noted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then I think the next one is Orator again. Orator, I'm not sure if it is actually a person or if it's a machine. These AI things sometimes. Orator? Okay, that's the second time we've called for Orator and there's no response. Mokotedi Tahe? Oh no, Orator speaking. Please, Orator, go ahead.
Okay, I've got a few questions.
Okay.
Okay, number one, can an NPC apply, or is it for P2I LTDs and sole proprietors? Should I ask all of them, or should Should I let you respond and then move on?
How many is a few? Let's see.
About four or five.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, okay, let's run through them. I'll make a note and then I'll answer.
Okay, fine. Can NPCs, non-profit companies, apply? And then I see the criteria for guest houses is a grading. What if it's an entertainment venue where there is no accommodation and there is no conference venue? Do you still need a grading to be considered? And then are there any grading funding from the Department of Tourism, if you've got a representative there that can maybe tell us, or any kind of programs that help to get graded? The criteria for suppliers of, for example, solar systems, what's the criteria for them? I know for installers, it might be outlined, but if a person is just supplying like the solar panels and stuff and they're not installing, what's the criteria there? Will you cover things like generators specifically, and then also specifically equipment that maintain the tourism entity? For example, if we can move from petrol lawnmowers to electric lawnmowers and electric pruners and etc. Do you cover that? And lastly, the 10% that, for example, if it's 10% or the contribution that we are supposed to put in as applicants, if there is a shortage of money, can that be in the form of sweat equity, some sweat capital, or labor? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me try and get all of this quickly. So NPC, can they apply? One needs to look at the context of the NPC, so and where the main funding comes from. So generally with the NPCs, they are funded by particular grants or donations, and there's a underlying activity that happens at the establishment. And let's take an example of rehabilitating sea animals or sea rescue. That's not the type of applications that we want to fund if they are reliant on donations for operations. If this is an NPC to provide a specific service for tourists, so they make their main revenue from gate takings or that type of thing, then yes, certainly that would be considered, but not the ones that rely on government funding and a very minute part of their revenue speaks to the tourism takings. Entertainment venues and anything that doesn't need to be graded per the grading council does not need grading. Excuse me. So the grading is a requirement for those establishments that require grading. I'm going to ask Bernie, when I finish with the sweat equity one, just to give us an answer on the grading funding. But your next one was criteria for suppliers only, suppliers of equipment. We don't deal with that. We require service providers to bring if I can call it, a turnkey solution. So remember we said initially that it is the responsibility of the establishment or the applicant to source a service provider. However, we have certain criteria that needs to be met. The service provider that they source would be one that sourced the equipment from wherever they get them. But certainly that comes as a package to the program and not as a separate purchasing of equipment and a service provider on the other end that implements them. So the two questions you asked about, will we fund generators and will we fund replacing petrol with an electric lawnmower? So the basis of the program needs to be considered when we look at any implementation that you're looking at or intervention. Is it does it assist in resource efficiency? Now, the one big thing with, let's say, the electricity is that we're trying to reduce the reliance on electricity, and now going from a petrol lawnmower to an electric lawnmower may not achieve exactly that. But I'm really making this as an example in terms of what you consider. Again, I say this is an assessment that needs to be done by the assessor and the establishment in terms of what takes this establishment from the base case to a more energy or resource efficient establishment going forward. Of course, we look at cleaner energy. So, putting in a petrol or diesel generator may not be achieving that. So one is to think and around that very carefully when those type of things are being proposed. Then on the 10% contribution, it is unfortunately a cash contribution that is required. And sweat equity will not do, because remember, an invoice or the quotation for interventions will cost 1 million. And if you have a 90% grant, there's 100,000 that needs to come from somewhere. And your no amount of sweat equity is actually going to cover that 100,000 that needs to be paid to the establishment. So no, we do not take into account any of that. I'm going to ask Bernie to just speak to grading funding, and then I see there's some other questions on the chat as well before we go to the next question. Orator, I hope that's clear.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bernie.
Craig. Let me quickly respond on the grading. The grading requirement, as you mentioned, is specifically for accommodation and venue establishments, as required by the Grading Council. Grading is a voluntary process. However, for the purposes of the Green Tourism Incentive Program, we do require that those enterprises that require grading or that can be graded should be graded. And within the grading application process, which is an online application process, there is an option to receive a discount. That discount is also funded through the department at this stage. And it's part of the Grading Council's application process. It's built into that. So as you apply for grading or apply to renew your grading, you will be prompted to ask whether you would like to participate in the discount program. And if you opt in and say yes, then you will be prompted for the supporting documents that are required. And then the Grading Council would take that into account. And the invoice that you will be sent for your grading assessment fees would reflect that discount. That discount is typically 80% of your grading fees. If you're a TOMSA member, you can also qualify potentially for an additional 10%, which would take the maximum discount on grading to 90%. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Good.
Okay, can I also just lastly ask, do you need one quotation from one supplier that I choose, or do you need 3 quotations?
So the requirement is 3 quotations, because we want to ensure that there's the quotations are fair and reasonable. So we do require 3 quotations, but you also need to highlight then the one that you will be assisting with. So I know that the guys, oftentimes the service providers have a problem coming out and doing on-site quotations because they're not sure whether the work's going to be coming to them or not. But we require the one that is your service provider, your preferred service provider must be an on-site quotation, because he's the one that needs to ensure that he's looked at the establishment and ensure that there's no pre-existing issues that need to be taken into account before we proceed with this application. So at least one of those has to be an on-site quotation, but we certainly want to see that it's a reasonable price as well. So we do need additional quotations to compare them. We're not necessarily going to look at the lowest price, of course. We need to look at the reasonable quotation and other elements, of course, as well.
And ultimately, it's up to the applicant to choose the service provider, or
It is up to the applicant within reason. So let's make a stupid example. The applicant comes with his preferred service provider that's charging us 2 million for a system. Both other quotations provided charges 1 million for the exact same system. We really have to then ask the question, what's the price difference? And there needs to be some reasonability in it. And if justifiable, then we can proceed. But yes, in the main, it's the decision of the applicant in terms of who they move with, because it's your relationship. You need to manage the relationship. You need to ensure that you deal with aftercare, etc., from these establishment or service providers as well.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thanks. I see there are still other hands, but there's still a lot of questions in the chat as well that have been listed. I'm going to try and run through these and not any more of them. Then maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more hands. And then I think we've already gone through quite a bit. So maybe that's where we'll have to stop without, cutting anybody off there. So if a resource efficiency assessor is allocated, does this mean that your application was complete? This means that you are successfully you have successfully completed phase 1, or you are eligible. You have been found eligible. Right. What is the weight allocated to each of the evaluation criteria, impact, transformation, and the size? Sorry, I can't give you that offhand. Secondly, is the permission to occupy issued by the traditional council acceptable as proof of ownership for those facilities situated? Correct, yes. There's about 3 or 4 criteria, I don't have them offhand, that we do require for tribal land occupancy. And that is certainly something that we will then provide if we do come across an application that requires same. My application took more than 2 years. The vetting of the installer was not done properly. The vetting, okay. Why do you have a written contract in place and only compile the vetting of the installer afterwards? I'm maybe going to ask that person. I don't understand the question entirely. Perhaps they want to just ask the question and can clarify that. So we'll come there. Establishment that house students can be funded? No, they can't, because that's not tourism. Are establishments for long-term stays allowed? No, they're not. Not seen as tourism. How can we check our status of the application submitted? If it is for window 10, you can send an application. You can send your query to the same email address, and it will be answered. Like I said, I can admit we have not gone through the box in the last couple of weeks, but again, it was in anticipation of getting everybody on the same page and moving forward. Is there a platform to assist with finding suppliers for grey water recycling and rainwater installations if we are having difficulty finding who meet the program requirements? It is your responsibility as the applicants to find these installers. What we can do, if asked, is to check whether we've had any suppliers that have provided these services that have been screened. We can obviously share those details with you and see whether they can assist you further. Can you be disqualified if not be graded as star? Yes, you can be qualified if you are an accommodation establishment or an establishment that requires grading. But this is only for the funding phase, not for the eligibility phase, which is phase 1. So at this stage, if you're a window 10 applicant, in the eligibility phase and you are not graded, you can still apply for the resource efficiency audit to be done, but you will not be able to proceed to the funding phase if you don't get star graded. The property is in my name, but the lodge is in my life partner's name. Do we still need to have a lease agreement? Simple answer, yes. Is the funding amount capped? Yes, it's capped at 1 million for the grant. So what this means is, if you do the assessment, the resource efficiency audit is done, and your interventions come to 2 million, we will then have to run the scoring model and see how much you apply, how much you qualify for. But fact is, you will only qualify for up to 1 million. And that's the cap. So the project cost is not capped. It only means you'll have to bring more to the table. but 1 million is the grant cap. Is there additional funding available if the property reached the limit of the grant received? There's no additional funding from the GTIP program for this. You would have to then apply for funding elsewhere, and I think we neglected to say that you could apply from any financial institution, including the IDC, if you would qualify for the IDC programs. How long does the process normally take? We applied and had an independent audit by an assessor. We have entered phase 2 in July 2023 and have received countless emails since however we confirmed we confirmed. So I think this one, my email address is in the chat. I think that's something that let's pick it up offline. Like I said, the processes have taken very long in the past. We've always been working on streamlining those and certainly are working on getting it as short as possible. I've made an example of how short it can be, where we've had an application put through after the 2nd of September. They've already been assessed by an auditor. And they should be ready for final assessment if they meet all the criteria. Do I qualify for funding? I'm running Chisanyama and car wash establishment. I'm going to say simple answer no, because it's not the tourists that come to, and well, I go to Chisanyama and car wash. I'm not a tourist. That's really just a local business for the locals. So not off the top of my head. Thank you. I think there are 3 hands that I can see here, MTZ and ZQ. Zola Q, I think you may have come before. Maybe we can skip you if you don't mind. Mokoteri Itache.
Yes, no, thanks. You answered most of the questions. But then, let's say I submit my phase 2 documents today. I understand that you're saying in the past you had some delays and so on. But with your new approach, what will be the desirable period for you to finalize this whole process after you receive the documentation required for phase 2? Thank you.
Phase 2, the funding phase.
Yes.
I can put my head on the block and say 2 months. No more than 2 months.
Okay, thank you.
For you to get an approval of or an answer on your application.
Okay, no, thanks, because I'm raising this. We just did the audit, but yeah, the auditor is delaying. I think we've been waiting for 3 months now to get the report, but hopefully it will come through and then we should be able to submit. Thanks.
That's something that you can also send through to me just to have a look into, okay? Sibusiso? Or Zibusiso?
Hi, Craig, how are you?
Good, thanks, sir.
All right. Look, the property is registered in my name, but the lodge or the business is registered in my wife's name. So now, how do we proceed with that? Do we need to have a lease agreement or what?
Yes, you have to have a lease agreement in place.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Craig.
Okay. If I may, in the interest of time, I think we are sitting on 12:30 now. If we can maybe wrap up. For those with burning questions around generic things, my email address is there. I've taken a risk in putting it there. I'm hoping that the questions will not be too many for me to deal with. I think we've gone through the application. Let's explore those first, the presentation, the website, and if there's any clarity beyond that, I'm happy to engage, but let's try and keep it to really critical issues. But yeah, and that's it from my side. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Bernie?
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you very much to everyone that stayed with us for the full 2 hours. I really appreciate your time and the time that you set aside. I trust that that is an indication that you found the presentation useful. I think just overall, Craig, it was very detailed and it went into very specific parts of the application process. I think you presented very fast because it's so much to get through. But the recording, as we said, would be on the website. I'm not sure how long it would take before we're able to load them. I think we may need to edit out little bits in the beginning where we struggled with the sound just to make it flow better. But the intention is not to delete anything that is of relevance. So I think there may be some editing of the presentation before we load it, or the video. But then that would allow you to re-listen to the video together with the brochure and the document that's available on the website. I think it would make a lot more sense. It would probably answer many of your questions and help you to apply. I also hope that this was very inspiring and would help people to realize the value of changing to more efficient operations, not just for the long-term cost savings that they would have, but for the greater good of the destination, to become a more responsible tourism destination, not just in name, but actually in practice. And I think we've achieved quite a lot. I saw there was a question around the uptake. I don't have the numbers with me, Craig, but I think we're well over 200 and something applications that's been approved. Not all of them have installed yet. Sometimes I think you have a period within which you need to install before we withdraw the application. But I think that's a year or 2 years. And very often we have an approved application, but people have not managed to get together their portion of the funding yet to allow them to commence the process. But maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit, Craig. But yeah, just in closing, I think it was valuable, and thank you for all the questions. These were legit questions. I think there's a few consultants on the line as well. Not to diss them at all, but I want to reiterate that we do not endorse any consultants. If you choose to use a consultant or a service provider to assist you, that's entirely up to you in terms of cost and risk associated with that. Craig, thank you also for being brave and putting your email address on the chat. I think you may get a few requests. I've also had some earlier about the time it takes and people wanting to follow up. So we will certainly follow up on that. And then Kasim and the team there with Craig, and for going through all the questions, I think you've covered everything. Thank you very much. That was well responded to, and I think we've managed to answer many of the questions. And as I said, yes, I hope this was insightful and valuable to you, and it will be available to listen to again. And then please get your applications in before the end of February next year. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. Craig, I'm going to hand over to you if there's anything that you want to say or add from that side. I see there's 1 or 2 more questions. And then if you don't want to say anything, let me know, and then I'll close the meeting.
Thanks, Bunny. I think maybe let's close the meeting, and I'm happy to engage those questions offline. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, then again, thank you very much to everyone, and thanks again for your time and for staying with us. I hope you have a wonderful day further and feel inspired after this. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.